I'm going to call to order this off-cycle special working session of the Harwich Conservation Commission being held on February 11th, 2026 in the Don B. Griffin Room at Harwich Town Hall. This meeting is, participation in this meeting is in person only. This is not on GoToMeeting, but it is being recorded. The agenda is available online on the Town of Harwich website. There is a presentation here, and the agenda item here is discussion on potential changes to fertilizer regulations in and around wetlands. So I prepared a presentation here, which we've had incomplete discussions here in the past about this, and I have been advocating for some time at this point for tightening up how we specify what can be applied on properties within the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission, within the jurisdiction defined by the Wetlands Protection Act. This is only about that. This is not about, well, there are some comments in the end, I guess, about more general things, but the issues, in my view, are not completely independent of each other. So my plan here is to step through the material I had here. We can discuss as we're going along, or wait until we're done to discuss. I don't really care. I have no clue as to, whether this is going to be like a half-hour thing, or we're going to be not done when they're throwing us out for the next meeting. So I would love to come to some agreement by the time we're done about what the next steps are, not about any specific action, I guess. Anyway, so let's see. This is the clicker. And look at that. So this is just a review of what I want to do. Review particularly relevant parts of Massachusetts and Harwich wetlands and fertilizer regulations, review relevant parts of the UMass guidelines for nutrient applications on turf and lawns, because the Massachusetts fertilizer regulations refer directly to those and make it actually a requirement to comply with the UMass guidelines. And then review examples, which I've talked about before here, of high nutrient soil amendments. And one of the points I'm trying to make here is that the Harwich wetlands fertilizer regulation, which is just one line in the wetlands regulations, needs to be consistent with a Massachusetts language on how fertilizers are regulated and restricted. And I'm trying to make, that's pretty much kind of the whole point of this. And then we should have a discussion about how this information can be reflected in Harwich wetlands regulations. So,
I'm sorry, can I interrupt already?
Please.
So when we're looking at the data that you've put together and all the information, I feel like and maybe we can talk about this after you finish the intro, but before we get to like the data tables and the rates and the percentages, I just want to offer, I sent all of this last minute, but this printout from the Nantucket fertilizer regulations that I think really will help us look at what at the work you've done and like add some important color to it.
Great.
Okay.
So you tell me when you want to discuss that. I didn't try to digest this sitting in front of me, so but maybe you can walk us through. And then I had to go back and remind myself of the basics here. What are the interests protected under the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act? And there are these 8 that are stated out pretty clearly in the text of that state law, and I highlighted the ones that I think are connected to how nutrients are applied to land in our jurisdiction. Actually, all these issues are affected by nutrient applications anywhere in town. But since we're only able to address in our jurisdiction, that's what we're talking about. So just the relevant part of current Harwich Wetland Protection Regulations are in 1.06, and these are up on the Conservation Department's website. I didn't cite any more information than that. So, and this is just an extraction. There's a lot more language under 1.06, but this is the relevant one. That is within the wetland resource area and its associated 100-foot buffer, no fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, and rodenticides are permitted, etc. And I highlighted fertilizers because that's the issue here. What is a fertilizer? And is that really the right word here? From state regulations, and here's the core of it. The state has complicated definitions of fertilizers and plant nutrients, and the state is really regulating nutrients, not fertilizer. So the statement about fertilizer says specifically that a fertilizer, the definition of a fertilizer does not include a product blended from organic compost or natural organic fertilizer, and then goes on to define what a natural organic fertilizer and what a plant nutrient is. I'm not going to read these out. They're very general. And plant nutrients in particular is basically anything that includes nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium, and then lists a bunch of things that may include nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium, but says very specifically the possible things are not limited to that list. So then, now we're going to, this is not the Wetlands Protection Act or the regulations for wetlands protection. This is from, it's really from, what is it, 330-31. 330 CMR 31 are the regulations that apply to fertilizer application, and they refer very explicitly to the UMass guidelines. And they say when applying plant nutrients, and then gives the whole list, the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus must be known and accounted for. A soil test is available for the application site, and the application of these materials specifically shall not exceed the phosphorus rates for maintenance or renovation of turf or lawn as specified in UMass guidelines, but then goes on to say no applications of plant nutrients. Note, this is plant nutrients, not fertilizer. Plant nutrients shall be made in amounts that exceed UMass guidelines for plant nutrient application rates to turf. Then I insert tables, and these are extracted. And, you know, sort of the unfortunate thing about the UMass guidelines is they're present on the internet in a bunch of different forms and not easily accessible by going to, like, the MDAR website, unless you have a specific URL, which I have cited here. But basically, this is a top-level summary, and the thing to note about the top-level summary is that for all these possible turf grasses, the maximum amount they're recommending for application in a season is 4 pounds per 1,000 square feet. Then they give a more detailed, more like an eye chart table that presents different alternatives of how often you're applying nutrients and what season you're applying the nutrients in. But then in the bottom row, it gives total annual nitrogen. And again, you'll note, nothing in there goes above 4 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet per year. And there's it's worth to note, one thing they call out very specifically is slow release nitrogen, and they give percentages of how much of these applications should be slow release nitrogen. And you've got to read the UMass guidelines to begin to understand what slow release nitrogen encompasses, because as far as I can take from that, it can encompass anything from manufactured pellets of nutrients that are designed to dissolve slowly to just organic fertilizer, which by its nature is slow release, or organic applications. And then there's phosphorus. Again, there's a whole discussion about phosphorus here, and what I'm not quoting here is, the other statements that put some pretty tight restrictions aside from this recommendation on how you should be applying fertilizer, phosphorus in particular, and also stating that in most cases there is no phosphorus needed. But a soil test is required, and these numbers apply to the results of the soil test. Whether it's very low, low, optimum, or above optimum amounts of phosphorus in the soil. Okay, so I believe, what happened there? Okay, so Sophia, you wanted to talk before we get on to this?
Sure. So the printout that Amy put on the tables, it's more specific to compost, but, and I'll be honest, like the conversions and percentages, like that's just generally not my strong suit. So to me, this seems like important information. Basically, so this is taken from the Nantucket Fertilizer Guidelines, who made a very specific document that applies to the soils in Nantucket and how to properly, I think, interpret UMass guidelines in the context of like a coarse sandy soil like Nantucket's, which applies to us here also. So this is kind of like a result of a work session that a lot of the landscapers on Nantucket were a part of, like Bartlett Tree was a part of, and some of the conservation folks over there. And so specifically this paragraph relates to compost, and I thought it was relevant that the total pounds of nitrogen applied depending on how it releases and what it's made of, so like a leaf compost versus like a biosolids or a fast release, it just stretches out the amount that's actually taken up. So 10 to 25% of the nitrogen is mineralized and released during a 1 year period, although the release rate is likely near the 25% rate on sandy soils. Therefore, a compost application containing 12 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet would be expected to release about 3 pounds, not 12.
Which is within the guideline.
Correct.
My reaction to this, Sophia, is this is in direct violation of state law, because state law doesn't contemplate how much of the nitrogen is released during a season. It just places a limit on the amount of nitrogen that can be applied, and percentages that might be slow release, which is what presumably the organic fertilizer, the organic compost qualifies as slow release. So this, I don't think this is right. I think it's wrong, and I think they're creating problems for themselves. I don't think they're solving any problems of nitrogen or phosphorus getting into groundwater by doing that calculation.
I mean, respectfully, this is like upwards of 12, like, industry professionals and, like, county people, and they've been reworked these, and it's what they go by, and they're very, like, I wish I had sent this earlier, but it's a really well-written document that's very clear on, like, your soil testing, your time of year. You know, they don't recommend using any biosolids or animal-derived compost on Nantucket because of the rate of release of nitrogen. But there are different values to the different makeups of the compost, and that it is actually relevant, the rate at which it releases and how much it actually releases, so that, like, using a leaf-based compost isn't gonna have that impact. Like, so I think to say that, like, they're wrong, like, this is a massive amount of work they've put into this. I think without reading it and, like, vetting who's done this, I think that's maybe a little out of.
Can I just ask an aside on this? I didn't look at all the document this morning, but I had a quick, what I looked at looked very practical to a layperson like me. It was very easy to understand. And to your point, it looked like it wasn't just 5 or 6 people deciding, you know, on a commit. It looked like it was a thoroughly done and thoroughly researched document. And I'm not jumping into this conversation between you, John, and Sophia, but I just wanted to know, do we have in Harwich a BMP manual like this in place that has been researched in the way that the Nantucket one
Not like
does?
that.
It's really unique that they've
Okay.
made their own, based on their soils.
Okay, so
All right, sorry, go.
my other comment about this is, okay, this is a conversation that's not going to end soon about the specific thing you're talking about. And the specific thing you're talking about here, which I have also opened up the same conversation in this presentation, is about the general rules for application anywhere. The point I'm trying, but that's not what that's not our jurisdiction. I'm doing this because I'm trying to connect these definitions to what we're doing for specifically in our jurisdiction and how we're regulating things in our jurisdiction. So I have some pretty harsh comments at the end, however, about what we should be doing about what you're talking about in town, but it's not anything we're going to resolve here. What we need to resolve here is whether and how we should change what 1.06 says. And one of the questions that we're going to end up discussing is, does what you're saying or what I'm saying about general fertilizer regulations have anything to do with that? I maintain that it does in a particular way, but let's move on, unless you have more to say here.
Can I ask one more question, if we can
Of
finish
course.
the paragraph? So, does nitrogen slow release, but phosphorus doesn't? Like, it goes on to say how it's way too much phosphorus on this one paragraph.
12 pounds of P2O5. No, phosphorus does not slow release, I don't think.
I don't think so
But it does bind to iron in the soil, and it's just a different mechanism entirely. There's some rule of thumb, which I've never been able to, like, completely verify or qualify, that within 200 feet of, like, a pond or or, you know, some wetland resource, the phosphorus is a threat. Beyond that, before it gets to the water, it binds to iron in the soil. That's what I've read, and I can't even cite a reference for that, and I don't know how good that is. But for us, that's important because our jurisdictions are all within 100 feet, or at most 200 feet of some resource, so that's an important thing. And P2O5, you know, it's phosphate. That gets into the soil, and it gets taken up by plants to some extent, but it also will leach out.
Yeah, it isn't a slow release in an organic, like a compost delivery system. I'm sure you can buy a synthetic one that will release it over time, but the reason nitrogen can be slow release or fast release is in like an organic compost, it requires like soil microorganisms to break it down in order for it to be.
Okay. It just sounds like such a delicate balance of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
interested in reading the whole thing.
Now, for me, what triggered this whole discussion was Super Pete. And I first encountered Super Pete when a landscape company proposed that Super Pete be put down on my lawn. And I asked them what it was, and they gave me the tear sheet from the vendor. And I looked at the tear sheet and did a little arithmetic, and honestly, I was horrified. And I told them no. And then lo and behold, a year or so later, they came in here and asked us for permission to put this down on a property that was right on the water. And for some reason, which still escapes me, the Harwich Conservation Commission approved that. I think it makes no sense. So let's talk about what Super Pete is. These are numbers taken right off the tear sheet, which there's a copy, that Amy sent. You can also find the copy online on Pacella's website. Kildall nitrogen is what you get when you dissolve a soil sample in sulfuric acid and then analyze that for how much nitrogen is in it. And it includes, according to a definition I read, it includes organic nitrogen, which is what Sophia was describing, and also ammonia, which is quick release, non-organic nitrogen. So most of this stuff is organic nitrogen at 2.7%. Then total phosphorus at 1.1%. They state the density at about 800 pounds per cubic yard. This stuff is made up of sawdust, wood chips, and municipal biosolids, and the recommended application for turf top dressing is 1/3 of an inch.
Can I ask a quick question? What are municipal biosolids? I mean, I know what biosolids are, but
It's
the municipal is
processed
throwing me off.
human waste,
Okay,
and it's municipal means it comes from Chatham or Boston or someplace like that.
okay.
And it's processed, it's clearly.
They got a treatment plant or something like that.
Yeah, right, or I don't,
A lot of it comes from Dartmouth.
A lot of it comes from Dartmouth, okay. Just curious, thank you.
So what is the actual nutrient loading? This, I state, and I back it up. For one thing, I don't know, you landscape professionals probably know that 3 cubic yards of some material will cover 1 inch per 1,000 square feet. So they're recommending 1/3 of an inch, which is a cubic yard or 800 pounds per 1,000 square feet. And if you do, and you can do the math backwards, which I put there, I don't need to go through it, but when you apply that to their recommended application rate, the result is 21.6 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet and 8.8 pounds of phosphorus per 1,000 square feet. This way exceeds by a factor of 5 UMass guidelines for nitrogen, and mostly, according to UMass guidelines, you never actually have to apply phosphorus. And if you do, you have to be very careful about measuring what the requirement is and how much you put down. This is way beyond that. So this is one thing, and I only know one vendor specifically who's using this. I've talked to other people who intimate that they're doing something similar, but I don't know if that's true. I don't know, and I don't know how frequently this is put out, but I look for other examples. And part of the problem with going through other examples is a lot of, you look for commercial compost and you don't get the analysis. Black Earth, which is the company which is collecting food scraps at the transfer station here, makes compost out of the food scraps and other things. I think they claim they don't use biosolids.
They don't.
I don't remember whether they use manures or not, but, and they don't give a recommended rate, but I use the 1/3 of an inch, that is 1 cubic yard per 1,000 square feet, to see what the results would be here. And the document that I included here gives analysis done by the University of Maine on 3 different samples, which they identify by location, which I assume to be places where they're making this compost. Basically what that comes out with, if you apply this at 1/3 of an inch, is somewhere between 5 and over 7 pounds per cubic yard of nitrogen. And then, I don't know, 2 to a little over 3 pounds per cubic yard of phosphorus, which again, for the most part, exceeds UMass guidelines, therefore really is inappropriate to be using anywhere here, in my view, aside from, the industry expertise that Sophia is citing here that says otherwise. So where I come to with this are 2 points. To be consistent with the state fertilizer regulations, our wetlands regulations should be adopting language that is fully in line with Massachusetts plant nutrient regulations for turf and lawns. That is, since the state of Massachusetts is not regulating necessarily directly fertilizer, they're regulating the application of plant nutrients. And that should be reflected in how we regulate the use of such things in our jurisdiction. And so our language should use, in my opinion, different language, which we should discuss. And secondly, to be consistent with the intent of our current Harwich wetlands regulations, we should never be issuing permits allowing use of soil treatments on turf lawns in our jurisdiction that result in measurable amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus. And then I have a whole bunch of questions.
Before we get to can we go back to that group? So I haven't been with the group that long, but I feel like every time we've approved something in the order of conditions, aren't we saying like no fertilizing?
It says no fertilizer, but my point is, if someone wants to get technical and say, we're not applying fertilizer, we're applying compost, which is loaded with plant nutrients, they can
So you
claim
wanna change
they're
the-
not they are complying, and that's what happened a year ago.
Yeah.
That's precisely what happened a year ago.
But I'm looking at this, and
Yeah.
I haven't actually read the state stuff myself, but what you pulled from the state, I'm not sure what, on this related definitions from state regulations? Oh, hold on, maybe it's here. I mean, the way you had it in that last slide seems super clean. They use so many words, I feel like they're
Who
purposely.
uses so many words? The
The
state?
state, like, I feel
Yeah.
like it's just one big circular mess.
Well,
that no one can
well,
figure
it
out.
is, and if you try to read both the regulations, the state regulations, that is 330 CMR
301.
Right, 31.
31, and then they refer to 32 and 15. A, the science is complicated, and B, not to be harsh here, but there is a bit of regulatory capture going on here. The industry has a huge hand in writing this language, and this is part of my reservation about this. Yeah, there were experts, and there are people, respectable academic people with academic knowledge doing this, but that doesn't mean what they come up with is the right thing. And we have to be aware that there are people with vested interests in certain outcomes having a significant hand in writing these regulations.
Okay, so back to
That's
your,
my editorial.
back to your conclusions then.
Yes, okay.
So basically, you'd like us to rewrite the Harwich wetlands regulations to be consistent with state.
Yeah, it's
That's
like
still
a
confusing.
few words
Okay.
in there. It's not like wholesale rewriting the whole thing.
Right.
It's just clarifying that you can't put nutrients down, not just that you can't put fertilizer down, because you leave like a loophole there.
So can I ask a dumb question, but the last, what you have here, turf lawns of any kind that result in measurable amounts of nitrogen or phosphorus applications. So that's essentially saying that you can't put anything down that's going to result in the addition of nitrogen or phosphorus.
That's what I'm saying.
When you say in measurable amounts, so that means no amounts of nitrogen and
That's
phosphorus.
what I'm
Okay.
saying.
Okay.
That is an item for discussion, but that's my starting place,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
And because, well, let's not get caught up in that discussion. Let's just finish and then we can have an open discussion here.
Okay.
So, all of this, for me, provokes a bunch of questions. I don't know how common the use of products like this is in Harwich. I suspect it's more common than at least I initially would have thought. Are these products even registered with the state for sale and use, which is required by law? And I made a very preliminary investigation into a list of registered products. I could not find Superfeed in there. That's not a definite conclusion, but I think there needs to be a definite conclusion about that. Are the people who are applying these things keeping records as required by law, i.e., if the town wants to find out what's happening, can we get that information? Some of the products, like Superpeat, contain biosolids, i.e. processed human waste. The state regulates such products. I don't understand the regulations, but I want to know whether these products actually comply with state regulations. And that's at least 330 CMR 32, which is, another long, confusing set of regulations. So then there's sort of the more direct questions about our interest. Can incidents of harmful algae blooms or other acute localized pollution events be traced to specific nutrient applications near waterways, particularly freshwater ponds and rivers, but not just freshwater ponds or rivers, because these things get applied on saltwater, waterfront properties as well. And sort of related questions, when someone applies a thing like this, or just a regulated and in general areas legal fertilizer application, when it's done near waterways, do specific incidents like storm events, excessive rainfall, or somebody leaves their irrigation on too long, or there's a leak in the irrigation, or other things, those result in runoff, which washes a substantial amount of plant nutrients directly into the water resource, causing an immediate or near-term algae bloom. And my question is, can things that have been happening in town recently be traced to events like that? I doubt we can go back in history and figure that out, but it might be a good thing to think about that as we go ahead. But also, can we directly connect chronic problems like algae blooms, like Hinckley's Pond algae problems, to specific nutrient applications, even when there isn't like a very discrete localized runoff event, but when people are just applying it to their lawn, it gets watered in and leached in and ends up in the pond or the river or the saltwater estuary. I think we need better answers to these questions, because we're, you know, people are in town are upset about these things and don't really quite know what to do about it. And my final point is not our jurisdiction, but I need to make this point anyway. Aside from how we regulate stuff within our jurisdiction, I feel very strongly that the town needs to be more fully aware than it appears to currently be about how these products are used in town, and be ready to enforce restrictions that are embodied in state law and regulations through state agencies. Specifically, MDR apparently is the enforcement agency here. And I don't know if MDR is accustomed to actually paying attention to these things, but I think potentially these things are part of what's causing problems that we're all aware of in town right now. Okay. I'm done for the moment. Let's see, should we go around and get comments from people here? And we have a couple people in the room, but let's just, I don't know, Amy, you want to start off? Why don't you
Sure.
start off?
Sure. So in general, regarding any regulation, the state standard should be the minimum, whether it deals with nutrients or other activities. So I think formally adopting the state standard would almost be compared to what is probably going on now in town versus what petitions at town meeting have been for all-out bans might accomplish reductions potentially if we do some education, but is not, it's not an all-out ban, which has been which has been put at town meetings too. So, go ahead.
Can we clarify here? I think you're talking about state regulations for the town as a whole.
I am, yeah.
You're not talking about, I am not suggesting, and I don't think you're talking about applying the general fertilizer rules to our jurisdiction for fertilizer application. All I'm proposing is applying definitions.
Yep. And I mean, I know we can only regulate what's in our jurisdiction, but and this is just a work session, so, because we don't normally, have the bandwidth, I know I don't, after our regular meetings to talk about these things, but just, next steps will be bringing in potentially health department, having public hearings about this, if we can come to some conclusion. But I think it's, basically what I'm saying is I think this is a good step. But I do want to fully look at the land management, the practices from Nantucket, and I was hoping to have had time to look at what other towns, because I think Mashpee has some regulations as well. So I guess that's it for now. I think our language of just no fertilizers, and again, we got into the discussion with applicants about what fertilizers really are, and there's workarounds for that. So to change the regulations, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, to be consistent with the state.
Okay.
This mostly for commercial landscape applicators? that
Is
we
what
talked-
mostly for commercial?
These are regulations and whatnot for not using the super pede or any other thing outside of the 100% 100-foot buffer zone. Is this town-wide, just for
It's-
commercial
I'm-
operators?
I'm
Because a
not-
happy homeowner's not gonna pay attention to
Well,
this stuff.
wait a minute. Let's, although I am concerned about fertilizer use in town in general. I actually don't have a specific position about that. I'm not advocating anything in particular here about that, except more awareness and more reference to existing state regulations. That's really all I'm advocating in that respect. So I think that's a good question, whether, and I was reading the state regulations in particular again about this, and I believe that the state regulation actually prohibits pretty widely, not just what commercial applicators are doing, or not prohibits, but controls not just what commercial applicators are doing, but what anybody is doing. But the reporting part just applies to commercial applicators, which is, again, I take that partly as part of the regulatory capture that's going on here. That, that industry probably had a hand in crafting that language, and that, again, creates a big loophole, which is part of why we're in the pickle we're in, where some people are proposing an outright ban on fertilizer, and that results in a lot of conversation, because there's so many things that are unclear about that.
But just to come back to what you want to do today, you're talking specifically the wetlands.
I'm talking about the regulations that we have purview over.
100 feet buffer, right?
And yeah.
Well,
that's
it's riverfront,
basically-
200 riverfront area, and technically it could be floodplain.
Okay.
So, but
But
I'm
that's
just,
what we're talking about.
that's what we're talking about.
Question
It's
bigger.
almost impossible to avoid the broader discussion, and I didn't completely eliminate that from
And I
what
brought
had
it
to
up,
say
so I
here.
No, and
But-
I agree.
And you're talking about turf, because you talk, not, are you talking?
There we go.
So-
But, there we go, there's another
I
problem.
mean lawns, how about lawns? What I'm saying is, it doesn't seem to be talking about we see a lot of mitigation planting areas. Sorry for interrupting you.
That's all right, go right ahead.
We do a lot of mitigation planting areas, where maybe a one-time, at least, application of slow release might be appropriate. In here, it appears that you're saying lawn areas from the slide deck.
I'm taking language and information from the state regulation of turf and lawns.
Perfect lawns.
Our regulations don't refer specifically
Correct,
to lawns.
Right.
They refer to anything within whatever our jurisdictional area is.
Right.
And I'm not actually proposing to change that.
okay.
So, but again, presuming that we as a group accept the general concept here, that we just have to modify the language to be consistent with the state general regulation of such things, then we're gonna have a very specific conversation about exactly what the language is. And there are ways, that there can be, we need to get to that conversation,
Okay,
I guess
I
is
jumped
all
the
I'm
gun.
saying. But
Sorry, Wayne.
you have,
I'm all set.
okay. Viv,
I think it's a good start. I think it seems like a more manageable conversation than the larger one that we've been having. You know what I'm saying? I can begin to understand what's happening here, whereas before, and I know I'm repeating myself, but it's just the idea of making a blanket statement about fertilizer, I can't wrap my head around that. I do have other questions, but they're not immediately related, so I'll save them till the end.
John, clearly you put a lot of thought into this. I agree with the point that the language needs to be modified for clarification. What would be a bigger concern for me is that there currently is no soil test required. Without the soil test, you don't know what the best practice is gonna be for any of the plants in the area. I think the soil test ought to be required for new plantings, mitigation plantings as well, because then you would have an inclination as to how to treat the appropriate plants going forward. Understanding that it's going to be limited, but to get everything started, there's a correct method. I think that's important to not overlook. On the whole, I think the formulation of this information that's been presented here in a fashion that's going to be palatable to the general public and to the professional participants of the green industry, and that education is crucial. Because in short, what's being said is there's a lot of commercial applicators that are in violation of state regulations. And that may well be true. Good professionals will absorb good information. They will, in turn, find a way to capitalize on that information. They'll build on their business and they'll learn how to make money at it. That presentation, that application, if that's not touched on and pushed at a professional level, I think this whole thing is gonna die a very unpleasant death. Going forward, there's a single example that's come to mind as I've thought about this, and I think everybody here can probably remember the phrase, "Only you can prevent forest fires." Now, Smokey the Bear is a marketing campaign. And if you want to impact people for a long term, it's got to be done at a level that's going to be generational. This education needs to start at a level that's very easy to absorb and let it become a habit. Far beyond the town of Harwich, far beyond Barnstable County. And I don't think it's a waste of energy to explore options to kick off something like that at a local level. Marketing today is a relatively inexpensive and relatively easy process, but it does take some creativity and it takes some knowledge of how to get it off the ground and make it start to fly. Presentation through professionals to homeowners is going to be crucial. But again, they need to have a reason to do that. And building on the commercial aspect and the financial aspect, I think is going to be very, very important to that. As far as commercial agriculture goes, cranberry farming in particular, direct impact on wetland resources because they're generally side by side. The volume of fertilizer that's utilized by cranberry growers, as I see it and as I've learned, is minimal, but I think that needs to be excluded from the regulation for a couple of reasons. There's already state regulations that they have to adhere to, and the simple fact of the matter is any commercial applicator of any product is going to be very mindful of the cost. They're not going to be spending money they don't have to. That's going to be applicable to a grower of any commodity. Nutrient loading on the whole is a pretty broad subject. And for what I've read, fertilization or chemical nutrient application, I should say, is probably not the biggest offender to the impact of ponds, waterways. And I think that's got a big impact on the water quality. I think it's crucial to include health departments and health professionals and focus even harder on septic applications and septic waste anywhere near a wetland resource. Calculate the volume of acreage just in the town of Harwich, which is somewhere around 13,000 acres. You take out the ponds, you take out the wetlands, and you break it down and you look at how many single-family homes there are. Compare that to the population. Think about the housing units that are available for various places around town. Calculate the amount of units for the town in general. The state has a formula in Title V regulations based on bedrooms. The approximation of gallonage per day of wastewater, human wastewater, that's being pushed back into the ground is pretty massive. That's a lot greater volume than just nutrients being applied to plant material or plant growing anything, whether it's turf or agriculture or whatever it is. I think the focus on septic within a wetland recharge area or a wetland resource area is extremely important, and I don't think we look at that hard enough, honestly. Drifting into floodplains as well, because that is jurisdictional property, and I think that needs to be a consideration. So like I say, to me, this doesn't just stop at the level of nutrient loading through this. I would be very much a supporter of accumulating information that's absolutely pertinent to Barnstable County, much like Nantucket has done. And I suspect that in many cases the soil conditions there are probably pretty similar to what they are in Barnstable County. So without having time to read all that document totally, I gotta believe there's a good leg up there for some information. But continuing to accumulate the information, including the appropriate agencies, health departments, water departments, monitoring of water quality throughout the town is done through the water department on a regular basis. I mean, they have water tests, I don't know, if it's bi-weekly or whatever it is. It's very, very often. But, there has to be information there that can be obtained through examining the history of the test results. And I think some of that information may well be beneficial depending on where the tests were taken from, which well fields. Different locations in different parts of town are going to be closer to wetland resources than others. So I think all of that is a factor to be considered. I guess that's all I can put on the table at the moment.
Okay. Thank you.
So I am in agreement with, if we think the state has tighter language, I'm in agreement with moving the Harwich regulations to be in line with the state. That being said, I still think there's room for clarification because it's way too confusing. So that's my feeling on what you've presented. It's interesting you brought up the soil test, because I made myself a note earlier. I'm thinking it might be fun for us to introduce in our annual meeting for the Pond Coalition. Is there any way to make a soil test mandatory as we're approving these projects close to?
Soil tests are mandatory for applying fertilizer or nutrients, period.
They are.
Yes.
Okay.
For commercial,
Well,
Right,
okay, for commercials, so,
Right, as
yeah.
we're approving residential projects, can we mandate that they do a soil, like, just to get them educated?
Well, this is, I think part of what Mark was suggesting is that when we're stating what's acceptable in our jurisdiction, because that's all we're really
Right.
talking about, that a soil test be applied. But that's assuming that we're gonna agree, we're gonna permit any application of nutrients. So that's a conversation we have to have when we're talking about specifically what changes are we going to agree to make to the existing wetlands protection language, that 1.06 thing. So you're suggesting that somehow soil tests be included there. That implies we're also including some allowance for actual nutrient application, because there's no point in soil tests if you're simply saying, no, you can't apply any nutrients.
Yeah, no, you're right. I was
So,
actually thinking more from an
that's-
educational standpoint.
that's a
to prove this way we
conversation.
don't need it, but-
Well, the educational thing, we're not doing education here.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, we've
Never
tried
mind.
that
It's an
actually
interesting
by
idea. It's okay.
having,
We don't need to go down
by
that path.
having meetings, and we will have more meetings. That's more like a pond coalition
Yep.
thing. So,
And I
anyway,
love your marketing campaign idea, still on that one too. Because all the pond coalitions seem good. And then my next question, you also brought up, this was septic. So we are, from the pond coalition standpoint, we're trying to do a lot of education on septic and checklists and regular maintenance. As we're approving these projects, because I think I brought this up in one of my first meetings, like, do we ever see ourselves saying, you're close to water, so like you have to do an IA versus a septic?
we cannot. That is a health department decision.
Department, okay.
So that's through state law for health department.
people have presented projects where they're doing an IA and argued that that's part of remediation.
Mhm.
And I don't remember how we have dealt with that particular claim in the past.
We generally have seen, so ultimately it's the Board of Health who has to approve that, but we've generally looked favorably upon it as not the only mitigation, but as a portion of mitigation if people have to do mitigation on a project.
But keep in mind that IA, most of the IA systems, although Scott has identified one that, for which this isn't the case, they're only treating nitrogen. They're not treating phosphorus.
Right.
Right.
Scott has identified some proposed system which actually extracts phosphorus as well. But it's not, complete solution to that problem.
I would be agreeable to restricting this if there is a clause for you may ask with a soil test and like explain the scenario and what product are you using, whatever. So like during establishment, even native plants, if you have a mitigation, like Amy was saying, like there is a reason for that. If it's a mitigation area and it's not getting a fall cleanup, the organic matter and all of those nutrients are coming from the leaf litter and the buildup of dead wood and all of that stuff. If people are doing fall cleanups, which like we can't, we're getting there where it's like people are realizing that maybe some areas they can skip a fall cleanup, whatever. A lot of people don't do that. So it's like their soil fertility is only coming from what they are physically putting on it, which is not a great approach. I don't think in general, it's not a great approach if you're near a water body to add
I see.
like, especially willy-nilly or with like, strong fertilizers. I don't think that is proper practice. I don't think it should be allowed. However,
I'm sorry. I don't quite understand what you're saying. What exactly is not a great approach?
Like a strong adding, fertilizing with anything that's like, you know, more than anything strong, anything like the super peat, anything like a fast release fertilizer. I don't think that's a good idea in general, especially next to waterways.
How about someone with a lawn next to a buffer area, blowing all the leaves from their lawn onto the planting between the lawn and the waterway? Are you saying that's not a good idea, or are you promoting that idea?
I think you're throwing me off course.
Sorry.
That's okay. I'm like confused enough as it is.
Just
So
trying to
I
understand
just-
what you're saying.
Well, let me get there. I might get there. I think that if somebody showed reason, I think that if we say that sometimes there isn't a reason to apply organic matter, a light fertilizer, whatever, if there is a soil test, if there is a need, so like current cultural practices, which is like a fall cleanup is a cultural practice, irrigation is a cultural practice, choosing your plants is a cultural practice. So like if they have a standard landscape where they're doing fall cleanups and they're seeing, you know, poor results in their landscape, whether it's native plants or not, I'm not really talking about buffer zones, but like if, you know, their oak trees are failing and they're within the 50 to 100 or whatever. With a soil test, I think it should be allowed for them to come forward, or their arborist to come forward, or their landscaper, and say, hey, like, we're showing this, and like, this is what we'd like to apply, it's this compost, here's the compost test, here's the soil test. I think that there should be room for that kind of human intervention based on the fact that people do what they do, and they do fall cleanups. So like, in a perfect world, everyone has like, it, you know, they're really respectful of their buffer zones, they're really mindful of what they're doing, but, and even with that, like, they're still getting organic matter, they're still getting nitrogen, they're still getting phosphorus, it's just natural, right? It's all breaking down in place because the leaves are decomposing, they have, you know, healthy root mass, like, so I really do think that we should send the message that it's very important not to fertilize in these areas and not to plant things that are going to need a high amount of fertilizer. However, even native plants during establishment, that's going to be necessary. The 0 to 50, we require 100% native plants. So like, there should be no fertilizing of, you know, beds. I know this is going to start to get weird. But then you also have people who have lawns at the top of a coastal bank, right? And I think that, like, not everyone is going to come in and ask for permission anyway. Most people won't. Ideally, they're like managing their lawns. Over time, your lawn is going to need less fertilizer over time. Like, the more mature a turf stand is, the better the management practices are. Are they leaving the clippings? That's putting nitrogen back in the soil, so they're not going to need to fertilize. However, a healthy stand of turf is going to hold whatever erosion might happen to some degree. I think if they can prove that, like, they're in need of an application of something, I don't think that should be out of the question. In Nantucket's case, like, they have, I get what you're saying, and I understand there's like industry people in here, and I respect being suspicious of that. I genuinely do. However, I also think that like there has to be like practical understanding of different situations, and that's what makes all this stuff really difficult, is like trees and shrubs have different needs than turf has. Cranberries have different needs than either of those things. So there's nuance to all of it. So like Nantucket, where you can control what's happening, because it's literally an island, they have like a, you know, a fertilizer applicator license that they specifically have to do. They have this document that they use in their conservation buffer things that they say any fertilizer has to be applied according to the specifics of this document, which are really specific.
So, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This is specific to the 100-foot buffer, this language?
No, they refer to this document as this is any fertilizing in their buffers goes by this.
Wow.
Which is to say that native plants only need it at establishment. You should not fertilize native plantings once they are healthy and established.
Does it say that in the
Yes.
regulation?
It says that in this document. I know, I sent it this morning, whatever. It's worth reading, and I think that like this is, they have the advantage of having like a captive audience and like literally a captive industry and island, like that's great. It's tougher in Harwich. Maybe it would be a good like county thing. You know, so basically they're treating their entire surface area as buffer zone, which I think is a good thing, right? Where these are their regulations for anywhere. But for our purposes, I agree that we could be more restrictive. I'm in favor of that as long as there is a loophole for now for asking and proving that something is necessary. That would be my.
I love what you're saying. I think, yes, I do. I do, because, right, the devil is in the details. The devil is in how you reflect that in very specific language in the thing. So that's work that needs to be done, figuring that out.
Yeah.
And there have to be specific proposals.
Yep.
I just got a comment that the primary advocate for banning fertilizer on lawns in Harwich cites the Nantucket regulations as another place on Cape and the islands where they're controlling things. This doesn't look like control to me at all.
Well, you
It
should
looks
read
like-
the whole
I-
thing.
Well,
I think
I
it's out of
obviously will,
context,
but
yeah.
it's hardly super restrictive, right? It's allowing a whole bunch of things which will result in nutrients getting into the groundwater.
I feel like
It's
you're
just-
speaking too generally and too strongly in that manner.
Okay, well, I may be, but that's my initial reaction anyway, and it may be unwarranted, and I have to study that and digest it. And there's, you know, our discussion about what's gonna happen in wetlands bylaws is a little thing compared to straightening that whole thing out. The larger conversation that should happen in town about fertilizer regulations. But we're gonna have a little very constrained conversation
Yeah.
about what we're gonna say about that.
So my
Or-
point is that, like, I think that if we're taking a stance, my preference would be that that stance be restrictive with a clause.
Well, okay, let's see what
That's
that
all I'm
language
saying.
is. Let's see what that language is. You should propose some language, or sit down with others. I would be happy to sit down with you and try to figure out specific language which reflects what you're trying to accomplish. That's the task here, right, is to do that. But if you have anything more to say?
I have a quick question. The date on this is 2010 to 2012.
So it was revised in 2013,
Okay.
and hasn't been revised since, so.
But the reference before, I do think the home rule, I think
I
it
don't
has
know.
some other
I
home rule
honestly,
provisions.
I don't.
They did,
That's,
so
let's not get
that's
into
another
that,
issue.
because that's just way too complicated.
Can I ask a question about some of what you just said? So are you proposing, John, that the language that we have in front of us here for Massachusetts plant nutrient regulations, we adopt this
No.
verbatim?
No, I'm not proposing we adopt that. I mean, basically, that's language that's not in our jurisdiction. What I'm saying is that our language needs to be consistent with the definitions of fertilizer and plant nutrients that are part of the of the Massachusetts regulations. It's not, wait a minute. So, well, if we get more nuanced and do something like what Sophia is talking about,
Yeah.
which is allowing some applications under some circumstances,
But are you
we need to refer to the need for a soil test and the restrictions I mean, I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know how we would deal with that. That's a piece of work.
Yeah.
But all I'm saying is these definitions need to be accounted for in our regulations. And I'm suggesting that instead of using the word fertilizer, we use the phrase plant nutrients and refer to these definitions, this definition of what plant nutrients is, but also, you know, fertilizers and natural organic fertilizers, just to make it clear, because people are very confused about these different things, like natural organic fertilizer that's bandied about, and it doesn't necessarily have a clear meaning. The state has given a very specific definition.
So you're looking to adopt the state definitions as they appear here as
Exactly.
part of our bylaws, not necessarily the next slide, which is what's causing some of the,
The agita?
yeah, the discussion, let's say,
Well,
right? So you're more concerned about the definitions, the state definitions of what these
well,
things are.
yes. But the reason I included this is specifically the state says that no applications of plant nutrients, they don't say no fertilizer, they say no applications of plant nutrients shall be made in amounts that exceed. So the point I'm making is the state is attempting to control the application of plant nutrients, not the application of fertilizer, and that we should be doing the same thing.
But then it gets
Because-
complicated because what Sophia is saying is, in the amounts that exceed UMass guidelines for plant nutrient application, that's not one size fits all, because it's going to depend on, if I'm understanding this, I'm just trying to understand what's going on here. So, in amounts that exceed UMass guidelines for plant nutrient application, that's not a one size fits all. Is that the debate that you're having, Sophia? Is that where, if I'm understanding this, that it doesn't work in every single location, in every situation?
Yes.
Okay.
And if you read the whole UMass thing, it's complicated,
Yeah.
basically. It's complicated. And if this, if that, if
Yeah,
another
yeah.
thing, and we can't actually measure the amount of nitrogen in the soil
Yeah.
anyway. I
And it's
mean,
got
the
numbers
whole-
in it, so I'm asleep, halfway down the page, so.
Yes, sir.
One of the purposes of a regulatory board is to sort this out on a case-by-case basis, to put some common sense into a circumstance that isn't necessarily black or white.
Right. And we need a framework
Correct.
around which we can make those specific decisions.
Agreed.
Do we have, are we ready to take public comments here?
Yes.
Looks like we are.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name's Alan Hall from North Harwich. I'm just here because I'm a concerned citizen about the town of Harwich and what we have going on everywhere. I just want to know from this dialogue and this presentation, how does this affect agriculture? Is this anything to do with agriculture, changes at all?
We don't have the jurisdiction to
Agriculture.
tell you as a cranberry grower what you can do on your cranberry bogs. Is that correct, Amy?
That would be correct.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to get that clarified. Thank you so much for that, saying that. The other thing that, listening to some of these programs and some of the data that has been put up on the film there, I don't know if you know, you talk about natural, organic fertilizers, chemical fertilizers. The bottom line is nitrogen. Nitrogen is a source of either be natural, chemical, science, whatever. It's nitrogen. Do you realize, I've done some studying, the University of Connecticut has an IPM program, along with the University of Massachusetts, the Cranberry Experiment Station. They do a lot of work on nitrogen. And they also talk about leaf litter debris. And specifically in the University of Massachusetts, Connecticut, they talk about nitrogen contribution from tree leaves. And I don't know if you folks have ever gone to Cape Cod 5 and you buy a calendar, they get the free calendar every year, and they have a string of historical photographs from Cape Cod back in the day. You look in the forefront or in the vista views of the photograph, there's no trees at all. Cape Cod was bare. There was a lot of fields, They cut the trees off for firewood, for shipbuilding, all those things. We've got more trees on Cape Cod than we've ever had right now in this time frame. They're a large contribution to our nitrogen problem, based on the information here from the University of Connecticut. It's estimated that from 1,000 square feet, consider the average leaf drop of a typical woodlot can drop about 3,000 pounds of leaves per acre annually. An acre is 43,560 square feet. That equals 43.56 100,000 square foot. Equals 69 pounds of nitrogen. 69 pounds of nitrogen over an acre just from leaves and debris. The Conservation Department, back in the 60s, started in the town of Harwich to buy up lands and protect them. Over the course of time, the properties that they purchased were working properties prior to the conservation buying them, along the Heron River from Hinckley's Pond south. That was a major purchase at the time. There was hundreds of acres of cranberry bogs, and there was no trees in sight. You can look at the historical aerial photographs from 1938 from the Army Corps of Engineers, and you can see vast open areas. Conservation has its place. It's great to have open space, but open space also contributes to our nitrogen problem. The debris, the rot, the decay, all the trees that we have now. The Heron River is in terrible shape. It's a lack of maintenance under the osmosis of conservation and protection. Understood, I got it. But there's a balance there. If you just let it go and let the trees fall down and the leaves, you walk up along the edge of the river, there's at least 1.5 feet of litter from tree leaves over the years. Hunted through those woods many a times. That's contributing to our problem. We need to look at those problems also, other than just regulations. We're causing our own problems by not managing our properties, just letting them go in the osmosis of habitats and all that stuff. There's a balance. I understand that. I got it. I'm not trying to say that, but you have a buffer, 0 to 100. You can't cut down the trees, can't do anything. Well, they're contributing to the cause. It's just part of the whole natural ecosystem that we have here. And some of these things are man-made. Some of the challenges that we have are man-made because some of these bogs were built in the 1800s along the river, and there was old dikes and river channels through there that are gone, disrepair, there's nothing there, nobody's flowing it. I heard last year that they put the boards in at Hinckley's Pond and to raise the water level up because they were concerned about the drought levels. Well, I got that, and I guess there's a reason for that. But also, those rivers were flowing. And when you chalk up something, if you have a mud puddle in your backyard and you look at it in June when the pollen comes out, you see how it collects all the pollen in the pond, in the mud puddle. That's the same thing that's happening to the ponds. They were made to flow and go forward. The West Reservoir, since the commission voted to abandon the cranberry bogs there, since 2017, that reservoir has gone in terrible condition. Every year, that reservoir would drop the water 2 or 3 times, maybe 4 times, just to flow into the cranberry bogs for winter protection, for flooding, for harvesting, etc. That's not happening anymore. Now we're having algae blooms over there. So we're contributing to our own problems by not doing that. We're looking at the short answer of the small elephant in the room, when actually we've got a bigger elephant in the room that we try to protect, but in protection, we're hurting ourselves, in my opinion, and what I read online. Commissioner Coleman mentioned education. That's the best thing we have. Smokey the Bear, that's the best analysis to put there. Welcome to Cape Cod. Put a sign on the Route 6. We're a sole source aquifer. Enjoy our place. We want you to come back. We want you to live here. We want you to work here. But just remember to be cautious of your environment. That helps a long ways. I think you need to have experts in here just to have those forums with the public. I don't think we need more rules and regulations or change of definitions. I think it's just the habits of what we're not doing. And nobody's going to ruin what they have. Who's going to hurt their property? Who wants to ruin it? If you want to put a regulation on something, maybe what's the owner going to get in balance for being overregulated? Maybe we lessen their taxes a little bit so they have a Cape Cod lawn. Maybe take the tax break down. Oh, they're going to have a Cape Cod lawn. Well, the house can't generate $2 million worth of value. Now it's only worth $500,000. You got to think outside the box. It's not just one thing.
Just
So-
as a point of information, Alan, Amy is working on proposals to raise money to do a study of the Herring River, which would, particularly upstream from the dam, which would address some of the issues you're talking about. Doesn't have much to do with the conversation we're having here today.
Yeah.
Yeah?
So, actually, just yesterday, I had a conversation, well, we're gonna be putting in another grant application through Coastal Zone Management, and hopefully collaborating with Association Preserve Cape Cod, as well as Harwich Conservation Trust, to study, from the dam all the way north up into Long Ponds, impediments to water flow in the river. So, cross fingers that'll come through. So
Yeah.
we understand there's a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of human impact over the years
Yeah.
that's contributed to the problems we're facing right now.
I want to help as a citizen and try to get that, but I reflect on these things from the historical knowledge that I have and from growing up here and knowing what has happened, and you can see the changes, and I can share with you photographs of the Herring River with trees gone. However, I know it's not this conversation, John, but it all comes into the balance of it all. One other thing I will say is the road runoff into these ponds. There's tremendous amount of washouts around the West Reservoir. I have videos of it. I shared it with Amy back in October. Water coming down there fast, and the river was flowing, going right into the West Reservoir with all the sediment. It was a 4-foot ditch, draining right into the West Reservoir off of Bells Neck Road. Then you go on the other side. I know when I was on the commission, we talked about closing the road off, and I was a big proponent of saying, no, don't do that. But we need to have some sort of a containment for that water runoff. That's not helping. So all those things layer up. So thank you for your time.
Can I respond?
Yes.
I think I get your point. I think that there is, I'm just curious about your thoughts of like, there are quite a few people who have homes here who don't care about doing the right thing with their landscape. And like, yeah, I think in a perfect world, I don't know how we would affect change to help them see the light and see that what they're doing is, you know, they probably also like to go fishing, but they want a perfect lawn right next to the ocean. Like, it doesn't line up, and they don't care. And I say this as somebody who has worked for people like that, who just no holds barred, like, I want my lawn as green as possible, I want my landscape perfect, like, do whatever you need to do, nuke it, right? There are a lot of those people, and I think that when, I don't know, it's like, you have to have some framework in place, in my opinion, to legitimize the fact that they're not doing things the way that they should do. And that, like, sometimes rules like this, I mean, most people don't pay attention, right? So we're kind of like, we're throwing these rules out, people are sort of doing what they want, but at least in this scenario, like, they might know that we take it seriously, that if you're that close to the water, here's the right thing to do, and if you're not doing this, you're doing the wrong thing. Odds that they're getting that memo, unfortunately, are slim. But, like, you know, I think that not having any regulations in place leaves the chances that they're gonna know, like, that education won't get to them. What do you think about that?
Well, it just comes down to getting that information out. How do you get it out there, and how do you educate the folks, and what do they capture, and what do they take, and what do they throw in the mail, you know, in the trash? I understand that. Who's going to police all this stuff, though? That's another big problem. So I got it. I'm not saying pros, cons, or anything. There's a lot. You're exactly right. I know people that buy a $5 million house down in Saugatucket. They come down for the weekend. You can walk on their lawn with no shoes. You go to my house, you're gonna, because it's got everything everywhere. So it's a big difference. And who am I to judge? That's their rights. That's not my, you know,
Well, it's all our water to drink and all our.
I understand, but what I'm saying is that balance. So
Yeah.
it comes down to education. That's where it comes down to. And having things at the community center, maybe you put stuff inside the tax bills, a little notice to people.
Yeah.
You know, that mail goes out all the time. People pay the tax bill. I don't know, something. Just trying to.
Add on to that? I think that I agree with you, Sophie. I think you have to have some kind of regulation, whether, you know, how it gets enforced, whether people abide by it or not. I think that can be true and should happen. But I also agree with your point. We had this conversation a while back. You need your own Smokey the Bear, whatever he's called, here. You know,
think so.
something as simple as that, because I've never heard it in all the time. Like, I've never, you know, I think it's just people assume that you have common sense to know what the right thing to do is, but if there was a character, or to your point about, you know, where the Cape Cod sign is, some kind of simple, and I know that takes money and.
I already have it written down here.
You know, just.
Freddie the Fish, help
We need
help
somebody,
take care
yeah.
of your
We
home.
need somebody, could you do it through the schools, you know, could you run a competition, you know,
Yeah.
at the high school and have somebody come up with the
idea.
campaign? You know, it's a simple, and then
Yeah.
you can't plead ignorance, do you know what I'm saying? You can't say, I didn't know that you're not supposed to do this, this, and this.
Mhm.
You know, so you've got that going on, and then you also have whatever ends up being the you know, the more robust regulation.
I agree that public education about these issues is important. I do not agree at all that you can use that need and what you might perceive as the apparent lack of sufficient education as an excuse not to do anything else.
No, no one is saying that,
Well,
though.
no, that claim, people have gotten up at town meeting and say, the only thing we need here, we don't need to regulate this stuff, we just need to educate the public.
Yeah.
I believe that is really the wrong conclusion, and we certainly should not be taking that on board, and I don't think we are, as a reason not to attempt to make our regulations more clear and realize the intent of the regulations and create a framework where we can be more specific about what's going to be an acceptable and healthy way of managing people's property within our jurisdiction. And it is not just private property. Everything you do on your own personal property affects everybody else. Nantucket Sound is polluted because of septic systems, because of fertilizer being put on lawns, and probably 1,000 other reasons, as are all of Harwich's waterways, although there are some nice and still clear ponds up in Six Ponds area, but a lot of ponds in Harwich are horribly compromised because of these problems.
But I think it's two conversations. I'm not saying for a second that the problem is people are not educated and that's why this is happening. I think two conversations can be happening at the same time.
And
You
there
know,
are-
this
there-
conversation and then the larger conversation. That was the point that I was
And
making.
there are those in town who are attempting to address the need for education. And nothing is gonna happen along those lines without people stepping up and doing it.
May I say one more thing, Mr. Chair? Along the lines of education and getting the public involved, having this meeting at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday isn't helpful. This should be done in the evening. I had to take 2 hours from work to come here, because that's how important it is to me. But these are the kind of programs that happen, and you don't get the folks involved. So I would recommend having a different forum at a time when people are available. Thank you.
Thank you.
You may.
Maura Hall, concerned citizen. As people have been discussing things here, a few things, having different background that I have, not having been born here, but transplanted here about 35 years ago. I've had the viewpoint of sort of the people not from Cape and the people from Cape in terms of how they view water. They don't think about it. So the Smokey the Bear / whatever icon you want to use, marketing, also having marketing background. I think there are very many ways to get that information out there, get it organized, and yes, to my husband's point about community meetings, I realize this probably worked for a number of you, but it doesn't work from a number of the community. I mean, I'm here on my time too. So next thing I would say is, having worked in a few towns around here, plus the county at one point, I do believe that some of the natural nutrient management, the decaying soil matter, the trees, the leaves, things that Alan spoke about in and around the town or conservation managed properties that are, feet deep, these dead decaying masses, logs along the river's edge, those things could be managed through a program by possibly calling groups such as AmeriCorps, who do those kinds of work. They work all over, and, others, and maybe even some volunteer arms who, are out there, concerned about the ponds and the rivers. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just, so, just to be clear, this was really just a work session, it's obviously open to the public, but the commission really hasn't had a chance at the end of their meetings to really delve into this, so before we had more public sessions that will be in the evenings, wanted to just have the chance for the commission to also just have a conversation where we're not, absolutely exhausted at whatever time at night, in order to have it. So I just want people in the room, people who do see this, because it's being taped and it will be aired, just to know that the commission wants to be transparent as possible with this. We just need it, so there will be future public hearings on this.
Going forward, would there be an idea to have, the natural resources officers here and, other interested groups in these work sessions? And then in terms of just like the housekeeping of the work session itself, I happened upon seeing this meeting posted, like I think 5 days before the date it was to be held. Is there any other way to, know, are you planning, do you have a calendar set for these meetings to be able to come to, so people like who are working can plan, or?
So we haven't come up with a calendar yet, but
Okay.
again, when there's ever a public hearing on this, it'll also be in the paper. And
Well, I mean, this is a work session, and,
Right.
and if you want, like, certain community people who are concerned, and residents and other groups of the town and stuff to all get on board, then, I realize that's a lot of juggling of people's calendars and stuff, but if they were known before 5 days ahead, that would be good. That's all. Thank you.
If I can just respond, I think that, I think we should have more educational sessions, but again, some of the meetings ended up being I'll throw both of us under the bus, John and I going back and forth and not having enough time to get both of our opinions out there and get something this is build up where we needed to hash out what we're even talking about
Right.
before. And I'm in the landscape industry. I think that as soon as we have something to do, I will let the Landscape Association know, we want those people in here, we
Yeah.
want discussion. This was really just because
That's it.
we all needed to kind
Yeah.
of hash it out and then step forward. But
Okay.
there's no exclusion of anyone.
No, I didn't mean to, I'm just saying, and I recognize calendars are hard to,
Yeah.
it's a large group here and people, and even ours, but, I imagine that other folks like me
Totally.
might want to participate,
Yeah,
and I'm
we
not in the
definitely-
landscape industry
Yeah.
either. I'm in other things, but just, there are people like myself and him that are concerned about stuff, and, the opportunity to speak is appreciated. That's all.
Well, when we get to the point of proposing actual changes, there will be a public meeting, and it will be posted, and
And they're always
will be
in the
opportunity
evenings,
for
so.
a more full public
Yeah.
discussion. And we have had, in 2025, we had 3 public meetings?
3 work sessions, yeah.
3 work sessions, not about this specific topic, but more generally about
Landscape practices, yeah.
landscape practices in general. And there was, you know, a range of participation, but, you know, some people had problems in the day, including people on the commission have problems
Right.
scheduling something during the day.
Mhm.
You know, and we tend to have very busy, as Alan is well aware, very busy schedules in the evening, and it's really hard, you know, you can't set aside 2 hours in an evening to talk about this. It just doesn't work.
We would have
Yeah.
it would have to be a separate meeting in the evening, aside from our regular schedule where we have the public hearing.
Yeah, and then, if I may say, I was instrumental in helping with work groups in another town for other things not related to this topic, but where community input and outreach was desired and needed, and you had work sessions, everything, and it was largely related to changing zoning laws, okay? So I'm very aware that there are people who are out there who bring in staff, even consultants, which I was, to facilitate those kinds of meetings, to garner the community's work sessions, along with the professionals from, you know, the commission and everyone there, sort of guiding discussion about, you know, facts and options and, you know, where people wanted to be decision-making, so that people can be a part of this whole thing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It looks good on you, Mark.
Sorry.
I see, I don't have a flag on mine, I'm sorry.
Excuse me, I got a family emergency.
No problem.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks.
So, hope everything's okay.
It'll work out, I believe.
So, at this point, we gotta wrap up and
Yeah,
talk
other-
about next steps.
Yep.
What are we doing next? How are we gonna get from here to there, I guess? I don't know, do you have an opinion or an idea, Amy?
I mean, I think the idea of drafting a proposal that we can talk about here as a group is a good one. I would just say, probably just be aware of, you know, open meeting law, so when gathering, in terms of formulating things, you're always welcome to filter them through me, for comment and dissemination. So, or if, you know, again, so our quorum is 4, so if 2 or 3 folks want to work on any draft suggestions, you can do that.
So,
That's good to know.
I haven't thought specifically about the language changes here.
Yep.
I've spouted a bunch of ideas about it, but I would be happy to draft something, and I know that Sophia has specific ideas, and I don't know whether you want to draft something, or I can draft something and you can look at what I drafted and try to fit what you're thinking into what I drafted. Sometimes it's easier to have a piece of text in front of you and think about what you don't like about it and how you would change it than just to start from scratch. So I can do that, I can send it to you.
Yep.
I mean,
And then
I
we
do
can-
want to be careful about open meeting law. I
Yes,
just
and we
don't
can't
want
have, you know,
problem.
conversations, you know, with each other through emails and things like that. So, I would say maybe in the next 2 weeks,
Uh-huh.
come up with some ideas on language, set it to me, and if we wanna, set aside, you know, if it looks like we're gonna have a light agenda, we can do it in the evening for further hashing out, or we could set another one, another work session to do that.
Can I ask a quick question? Since it started with a presentation of being more in line with what the state is, from a conventional presentation standpoint, will we have the language of current Harwich, the language of what the state is, and then our proposed language?
I think that's helpful.
Our proposed language is the state language with Sophia's suggestion that we have an opportunity
To line the 3 of them up.
an exception. But I think from a presentation standpoint to a general public,
I agree.
it has to be more clear than what this.
Yep.
No offense, but just, until you walked us through it, it's like, okay, now I see where he was going. It was really hard to digest.
Because
that.
the knee-jerk reaction to a lot of people about changing regulations is that,
No,
is a no.
right.
But
But
you have
if
to say,
this is
what are the,
Harwich-
what are the current ones that
Right.
are actually in place anyways?
Right, if the state is in place,
Right.
Harwich is over here, it's vague.
Right,
If the proposal is we align with
Yep,
the state.
that's a great idea.
So there are 2 editing jobs here. One is changing the regulation, and second is how this is presented so people understand what's being
Yeah.
proposed. I had my own personal editor review this presentation, made some comments. You probably would have liked it worse before she had a go at it. But, yeah, input on how to present the stuff so it's digestible, absolutely.
So that comes after there's some kicking around of the language between John, Sophia, and Amy, right?
I think, yeah, I
It's
think
not
that,
that other people can't have a hand in it too, but
right.
Right,
But again,
then you
with
get into
open
4
meeting
people.
law, you
That's why I'm
don't-
saying you can't go beyond 3, right? You 3
Yeah.
can have that
Really
conversation.
should be having, yeah.
So maybe Susan and I then have a look at it and say, what the heck does this mean, and how do we?
Filter things through me.
Aren't we really, if this is Harwich, we
Right.
say we want to be state, but in addition to state, we want to add Sophia's piece.
So I guess it's the, what are we adding, what are
Well,
we
that's what I
adding
mean when they-
piece?
yeah.
Filter everything
Wait, John didn't like that.
through me.
I think you're making it more complicated than it really is. We're just editing, all we're talking about is potentially making changes to the existing Harwich regulation, period.
Right, to align
And
with the state,
we're also saying,
right?
yeah, to make it more clear and
The
enforceable, to refer to definitions in the state regulation, that's all.
Yeah, but what
We're-
she's saying is you want to make it consumable by the average person. You understand it, you know, most of us understand it, but how, if I'm understanding you correctly, how can you package this so that anybody off the street can understand it, so that
Wow.
it's acceptable?
Right, you're-
I think that's the thing,
Yep.
because then we need to ask what the townspeople think. So we're
Yeah.
just looking
But
for
that's-
something clear
Right.
to talk about.
There's 2 pieces here. One is presenting it to the public and explaining it to the public in a way that they can understand what they're up to. We're not there yet.
Yeah.
The first step is to draft language that we can all agree on,
Yeah.
just the 7 of us. Language that we agree on and we think is appropriate, and that we believe that we could vote
Right.
to approve as changes to the regulation. But before we can take that vote, we need to present it to the public. That's what you're concerned about. That's a separate step. That's embodied in some presentation materials that make it clear why we're doing this. But the first step is just editing the language itself.
That's fine. That's
Yeah.
kind of hoping it was one and the same, but okay.
Yeah,
Right?
Yes. Say, send things to me. I will compile, okay?
Uh-huh.
And then I will add to your Dropbox. Okay?
yeah.
Okay.
I'm afraid to ask the next question, because
Oh,
that might
there's
open
another
another can of worms, but I'm going to ask it anyway. All these questions and recommendations that you have at the end of the slideshow, how and when are those going to get answered? I know this is a separate
Okay.
issue, but
Okay.
what's going to happen with these? Do we just go off about our business into the wild and try to answer them
I'll be honest
ourselves, or
with you.
what, are we having
My
another
intention-
meeting?
My intention is to put them in front of the health department.
Yeah.
and
Okay.
potentially
And we've
the
had
Board of
conversations with
Health,
the health department.
which before the holidays, and before I had my surgery, we were trying to schedule some time with the health department and the Board of Health
Yeah.
to discuss this, and that's sort of gone out the window because I haven't been able, but
Okay.
that's sort of the next step, because those really, honestly, I mean, they're questions for us just contemplating all of this, but really they're questions for whatever the enforcement entity or the regulatory entity in town for this as a general problem, and that's the health
It's
department.
the health
Yeah,
department.
okay.
And so, I don't know, maybe we can talk offline, Amy, about how, or I'll just call
Yep.
Carrie and talk to her, or send her an email.
Send her an email and copy me.
I will do that, maybe just attach this presentation.
Yeah, sure.
Okay?
All right.
Other questions, comments, concerns?
I'm just gonna suggest that the Nantucket
Yep.
regulations be a point of attention for
Can you send me a link to the full
Yeah.
thing?
I did.
She sent
I
it this
did,
morning.
yep.
I'll make
Yeah.
sure,
Yeah.
have you gotten your email yet?
And
Not from the town, no.
I'll make sure to your other
Okay.
one first.
All right.
Susan pointed out that they are also passing other regulations on top of it, but it looks like it's kind of expanding on what that, so I think that original document is still
Yeah,
valid.
they
and-
passed a home rule petition total ban in May of 2022, which is sitting in front of the state legislature.
More reading that I have to
I think
do.
it- yeah.
I'm really not looking
Yeah,
forward to it.
there's a lot of, good though.
Uh-huh. Okay,
All right,
all right. Anything else?
need a motion to adjourn.
Do we?
Yes.
Who's gonna make a motion?
I'll make a
I
motion,
think
we
it's gonna be
adjourn
Wayne.
this meeting of, Wednesday, February 2,
Island-wide ban
No.
on
February 11th.
February 11th, excuse me, 2026 of the Harwich Conservation Commission.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.